At the lavish party in Beijing, some young men egged me on to go on stage and dance. My fiancé, Shelley, glanced at me and said, "Just go and dance once. Don't ruin the mood for everyone." I stood still, unwilling to move, and the atmosphere gradually became tense. Shelley's face darkened. "Molly, your family's bankrupt. Why are you still acting so aloof?" Laughter erupted around us. Adam slammed his glass down heavily. "If she doesn't want to, why force the poor girl?" Shelley's face changed instantly. The instigator of the commotion quickly apologized to me. On that rainy spring night, I waited in front of his car, just to say thank you. Adams lowered the car window and said in a deep voice, "Molly, do you want to come with me?" Later, rumors spread in Beijing that the prince had gone mad with love. He even bought an entire mountain to plant gardenias, just to win back his beloved. After my family's crisis, this was the first time Shelley took me to a social gathering. The gown was his choice, a satin sheath that accentuated my figure. The neckline was low, and the side slit was high, revealing almost my entire leg with every step. I was reluctant to wear it, but Shelley grew impatient. "If you don't want to wear it, then don't go." But I couldn't refuse. My mother was in the hospital, waiting for the money. After a few rounds of drinks, the notorious playboy in the circle suddenly pointed at me and said, "Molly used to dance since childhood, didn't she? Why don't you go up and perform?" I felt uncomfortable and forced a smile. "Sorry, this outfit isn't very convenient." "Shelley, your partner is making a fuss," the playboy said unhappily. Looking at Shelley, Shelley frowned and glanced at me. "Just go and dance once. Don't spoil the fun for everyone." I stood there, refusing to move, and the atmosphere grew even more awkward. The playboy continued with sarcasm, "Oh, the Christ family's fallen, and Molly still has heirs." Shelley's face darkened immediately. "Molly, your family's bankrupt. Why are you still pretending to be high and mighty?" Laughter erupted again. I looked at Shelley in shock. The hint of mockery in his eyes was particularly sharp and glaring. My face went pale, my hands clenched tightly, but I stubbornly refused to back down. "Molly, if you're not going, then get out now." I was choked with anger, tears of humiliation welling up in my eyes. At that moment, the man who had been sitting silently in the VIP seat, surrounded by attention, slammed his glass down heavily. The entire room fell silent instantly. Adams raised his gaze and said calmly, "If she doesn't want to, why force her?" Everyone fell silent, and the room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I looked at him with tearful eyes. Amidst the crowd's glamorous attire, he stood out as an elegant and distinguished presence. Adams's gaze swept over my face, and when he looked at Shelley, his displeasure was evident. Shelley was startled and quickly forced a smile. "Third brother." Adams raised his hand slightly, silencing Shelley's voice. "This isn't your wild party. Shelley, watch your manners." Shelley's face turned pale. The playboy, who had led the commotion in a drunken state, took the initiative to apologize to me. "Molly, I had too much to drink earlier. I'm sorry for my rudeness." I shook my head lightly. The humiliation and mockery from others didn't bother me much. What truly chilled me was Shelley's earlier attitude. "I'm leaving now." I turned to leave, and Shelley followed me out. We walked to the garden before I finally stopped. "Shelley, let's call off our engagement." Shelley was a bit angry. "Molly, are you never going to give up?" I smiled slightly. "I know my place. I won't hold you back." "Molly, don't think that third brother's intervention has made you a star." Shelley looked down at me. "You'll never reach that high branch in your next life. So, if you want to stay with me, I don't mind supporting you. And if I don't want to?" Shelley smiled nonchalantly. "Molly, don't regret it." I didn't say anything more and turned to walk away. This time, Shelley didn't follow. On that rainy spring night in Beijing, I didn't have an umbrella, just holding my handbag, waiting quietly in the soft rain, until the Rolls-Royce with dual license plates came into view. The headlights pierced through the fine rain, casting a bright glow over me. In the misty rain, everything seemed black and white. Only the faint blush at the corner of my eye and on my lips caught the deep eyes of the man in the car. The car stopped in front of me. The rear window slowly rolled down. Adams leaned against the seat, holding a slender cigarette. He looked at me, his eyes lost in the dim light, making it hard to see clearly. I took a step forward and bowed deeply. Adams, thank you for helping me tonight. Adams nodded slightly. It was nothing. I pressed my lips together and sincerely thanked him again. I still appreciate your kindness. Adams didn't speak further. I respectfully stepped aside to let him leave. I had no other thoughts in my mind. Just a simple thank you. But the car didn't drive away. Adams looked down, tapping the ash off his cigarette. He looked at me again. Molly. I was a bit surprised. Surprised that he knew my name. Even more surprised at what he was going to say to me. Isn't Shelley seeing you off? Adams's voice was low, but very smooth and pleasant. For a second, I was stunned. The silence around me was so complete that even the sound of the rain seemed to stop. I just told him that our engagement is off, I said softly. Adams glanced at me. I took a step back. Adams, I won't bother you anymore. Molly. Adams spoke again. Yes, Adams. Do you want to come with me? I was a bit dazed and confused, looking at him blankly. My heart ached suddenly, and the warmth spread through my limbs. I didn't know why, but tears fell from my eyes. You can think about it. No need to rush with your answer, Adams said, pointing to another car nearby. You're wet. Let my driver take you home. The next morning, I woke up to many missed calls on my phone. When I rushed to the hospital, my mother had already been wheeled out of the ward by the nurses. The hospital account was heavily in debt, which I couldn't pay. All of our assets were frozen. Even my bank cards were included. Now, I had only a little over 100 yuan in my WeChat account. At that moment, debt collectors arrived at the hospital. They cornered me in the corridor, pushing and shoving, even snatching my earrings. No one noticed that my mother, weakened and frail from 2 previous suicide attempts, had quietly gone up to the rooftop, and then, she jumped off, despairing. 3 months ago, after our family's financial disaster and my father's sudden heart attack, my mother had collapsed and attempted suicide twice. She was saved both times, but this time, heaven did not favor her. My mother became a handful of ashes, and I buried her alongside my father. On the way back, Shelley called. Molly, how is your mother? Shelley, did you send those people to the hospital? Shelley smiled. Molly, I just wanted you to face reality and lower your head. I smiled through my tears. Shelley, you really disgust me. Molly, do you really think I can't live without you? Shelley hung up the phone abruptly. Soon after, he sent me a screenshot of a Moments post. It was a post from my cousin Evan 3 minutes ago. Forever your little canary, even if it can't be seen. The accompanying photo showed 2 tightly clasped hands, one of which wore the engagement ring I had once given Shelley. I sat in the stairwell of the apartment until late into the night without shedding a tear. Finally, I dialed Adams's number. When Adams found me, my cheeks were already flushed with fever. Molly, he turned around, his tall figure standing out like a celestial being in the dim light. Adams extended his hand to me. I didn't take his hand but hoarsely called out, "Third brother." Adams lifted me into the car. He gave me some water. Are you feeling very uncomfortable? I leaned against him, shaking my head. They're nodding. We'll be home soon. Adams touched my forehead again, still burning hot. He took a bottle of Prunella from the car fridge and let me hold the glass bottle to cool down. I pressed the bottle to my face, looking at the well-lit mansion on the mountain top, which resembled a palace. I suddenly asked softly, "Third brother, may I take a photo?" Adams seemed surprised but nodded. I took out my phone and photographed a mysterious and luxurious mansion in the rain. Adams carried me upstairs and laid me on the large bed in the master bedroom. The doctor who had been waiting took my temperature, gave me an injection, and prescribed medication before leaving. I watched him remove his suit jacket and tie, revealing his lean yet solid back and narrow waist. His impeccably pressed suit pants wrapped around his long, sturdy legs. His physique seemed even more impressive than his appearance. Dizzy and somewhat dazed, I watched Adams turn around to meet my gaze. Seeing my dazed expression, his lips curved slightly. "What are you looking at?" "Third brother, can I post a moment update?" "What do you want to post?" the photo I took earlier. Adams's tone remained indifferent. Whatever you like. I bit my lip and opened WeChat. The photo was of Adams's mansion, with the caption, "Does this count as climbing the highest branch in Beijing's circle?" As soon as I posted it, my WeChat started buzzing non-stop. Adams reached out and took my phone. I nervously handed it to him. After he read it, he smiled and returned the phone to me. Soon, I received a WeChat friend notification. After accepting, Adams replied to my moment update. "Only for you to climb." Then my WeChat exploded. I set my phone aside and ignored the messages. The phone kept ringing, but I didn't want to answer. The fever medication began to work, and I lay there, feeling weak and sleepy. Adams leaned over and touched my forehead. "You're not burning as much now." I was too tired to open my eyes but held onto his fingers tightly. "Go to sleep." Adams's voice was soft. He didn't pull away his fingers, letting me hold them. I drifted in and out of a hazy dream. At times, I saw scenes of my family happily living in a garden villa. At other times, I relived the moment the doctor announced my father's death. In the end, everything solidified into a scene of blood. My mother's frail body twisted into an unnatural posture, her bones piercing through her flesh, blood pooling on the ground. She clutched the wedding ring she had worn for over 20 years. Unwilling to close her eyes, I seemed to be in a nightmare, crying out repeatedly, "Mom, Mom." I wanted nothing, could give up everything, as long as Dad and Mom came back to me. "Molly, wake up." Adams's voice rumbled in my ear, but I couldn't wake up. I even wished to just sleep and never wake up. "Molly." A pair of large hands gently cradled my wet face. Adams's thumb wiped away the tears constantly spilling from my eyes. "Molly, stop crying." I don't remember when I was pulled out of the nightmare. When I finally fell asleep, I felt the gentle touch on my brow. It lasted less than a second, but I felt it distinctly. The next morning, I woke up feeling much better. There were countless missed calls and messages on my phone. Most were from Shelley and Evan. I didn't delete any of their contacts. If they like showing off for moments so much, and sending screenshots to provoke me, then let's go crazy together. Ignoring the messages and calls, I opened the moments update I posted last night, perhaps because Adams didn't have many friends on WeChat. His reply was visible to no one else. Evan commented several times. "How funny, cousin. You think posting a photo of the mansion means you've climbed the highest branch? Don't be so vain. You're just a fallen phoenix now, not even as good as a chicken. Face reality. And if you're really in need of money, I know some rich men. Want me to introduce them to you?" I didn't reply to her, just got out of bed and walked to the beautiful terrace outside. The manor was surprisingly large. I snapped a photo and sent it to Adams. "Third brother, can I post this picture?" Adams didn't reply but called me shortly after. "Yes, third brother. How are you feeling?" "Much better. Go downstairs and have something to eat. Tell the servant what you want." "Okay, I understand." "Molly." "Yes, third brother. Do whatever you want in the future. No need to ask me." "Third brother, since you're with me, you naturally have the privilege to do as you please." "Thank you." "Molly, you don't need to thank me." "All right, let's have dinner together tonight." After hanging up, I opened WeChat and posted the photo I took earlier to Moments. I then locked my phone and went to wash up. After washing up, I went to the closet and was surprised to find only light-colored dresses. No dazzling, vibrant colors, only simple black, white, gray, and soft pastels. Even if I were clueless, I could guess what this meant. Adams must have specifically requested this. It had been less than 2 weeks since my mother's death. At least for this year, I should avoid bright-colored clothing. My eyes suddenly felt a sharp pain. I leaned against the wall, lifting my face to hold back the tears. Women are often moved by small details, but I was no longer that naive Molly. Adams, this towering tree with sprawling branches, would not belong to me alone. I wouldn't harbor any illusions. Never again. At 6 in the afternoon, I received a call from Shelley. He didn't believe I had truly attached myself to Adams, even though the angle of the photo proved everything. "Molly, I'm sorry about your mother. But that wasn't my intention. I really don't like your stubbornness. I just wanted to push you a bit. Regardless, things started because of me. I won't run away. I'll take responsibility. And how do you plan to take responsibility? I'll find a way to persuade the elders to keep our engagement. Molly, you're alone now. Your parents are gone. And you're beautiful. It's like wandering in the dark with no one to protect you. In this circle in the capital, you'd be devoured until there's nothing left. Shelley's tone was particularly persuasive this time, each word laced with coaxing. You see, we've known each other for many years. Our relationship is different from others. If you're with me, at least you'll have a place to stay and won't have to worry about food and clothing. Shelley, I interrupted with a laugh. I've already slept with other men. Do you mind? There was a moment of dead silence. After a few seconds, Shelley's voice came through, frantic. Molly, are you saying this just to irritate me? Are you trying to say that since you're living at their brother's house and you've been with him, you think I'll believe those 2 photos? Evan said she had someone specially check your photos. They were all previously posted online. Don't tell me you think that just because third brother said a few words on your behalf one night, you're really climbing up to that high branch. The sound of a car engine came from downstairs. I glanced at the time. It was 6:30. Adams was back. I changed to a more comfortable position and slowly said, Shelley, why are you so anxious? Didn't you say I'm beautiful? If that's the case, why couldn't third brother be interested in me? The world is full of beautiful women. Molly, do you really think your current status matches up to someone like third brother? Whether it matches or not isn't for you to decide. Stop being so stubborn. Molly, decides me. No one can protect you. Shelley, if you're so capable, why don't you take me back as your former fiancé? If you can win me back, even if you can't make me your fiancé, I'd willingly be your lover. How about that? Shelley laughed self-importantly. Molly, no one dares to compete with me for women. Then I'll be watching closely. At the moment I hung up, Adams had just pushed open the bedroom door. I had only turned on a wall lamp. The light was dim and hazy. He stood by the door for a moment before noticing me curled up on the sofa. Are you still feeling unwell? Adams walked over and touched my forehead. As his hand landed on my forehead, I gently held his slender wrist. Adams looked at me. I looked back at him. He was still wearing his tie, probably coming straight home from the office. Third brother, let me help you with your tie. Adams didn't respond but didn't refuse either. I knelt up from the sofa and focused on undoing his tie. After folding it neatly, I placed it on the side table. Adams also raised his hand and unfastened the buttons of his meticulously buttoned shirt. Then, he bent down and kissed me. I just took medicine. My tongue is bitter, I murmured softly, and Adams seemed to chuckle. But the kiss grew deeper. Maybe his kiss was too tender, or maybe the bitterness in my heart was soothed by it. In the end, I was lost in it without realizing it. Adams gently held my chin, wiped away the moisture from my lips, and whispered in my ear, Molly, you're not bitter at all. You're very sweet. I wrapped myself in a thick shawl and sat on the terrace, looking at the stars. Adams came out after his shower, wearing a bathrobe. After that kiss before dinner, I already knew what would happen tonight. But when he really held me in his arms, I still felt nervous. There had been kisses and embraces with Shelley, but nothing more than that, because I hadn't graduated from university yet, and my parents were always strict, so I hadn't crossed the line with Shelley. About this, Shelley had shown some dissatisfaction. To be honest, I never imagined I would be involved with Adams. Even though we had met a few times briefly before, I never harbored any fantasies. But now, I was having this intimate contact with Adams, and soon, I would become his woman. What are you thinking? Adams brushed away a stray lock of hair from my temple and asked softly, Third brother, I was thinking about why you helped me that night. Was it just a moment of kindness? Or, I'm not that kind-hearted. Adams interrupted me directly. When have you ever seen me meddle in other people's affairs? Even though I kept telling myself to stay clear-headed, hearing this made my heart race. I lowered my eyes, my fingers nervously twisting the tie of his bathrobe. Even my palms were sweating slightly. I don't understand. When I raised my head again, I mustered the courage to meet his gaze. Third brother, are you also attracted to me? Adams's thin lips curled slightly, his fingers brushing the corners of my eyes, his eyes glinting with deep and shallow smiles. Everyone has a love for beauty. I suddenly sighed in relief. But then, I felt an inexplicable sense of disappointment. Adams only cared about my face. Adams only cared about my face. That's all. Yes, I'm an orphan. Did I really expect a man at the top of the pyramid to extend a helping hand because of affection and admiration? But maybe this is better. He's interested in my face, and I cling to this high branch to fulfill my own desires. That way, I won't feel indebted. Molly. Adams placed me on the soft bed and brushed away the messy hair from my temple again. He looked down at me from above, but his eyes seemed to hold a touch of seriousness. If you regret it now, it's not too late. You're still young. I don't want to force you. Of course, even if you regret it. Adams smiled faintly, his tone calm, but it carried the confidence of someone in a dominant position. I won't make things difficult for you. On the contrary, if you need help, I'll still assist you. I lay on the bed, looking up at the man so close to me. In the capital, even a falling brick could hit a second or third generation wealthy person. That Adams's family is the most influential among the influential. And Adams is the prince among princes. He gets whatever he wants without asking. People compete to offer it to him. Yet at this moment, he said such things to a girl with nothing. Even if it's manipulation, even if it's a strategy to win a woman by retreating, it's still moving. After all, Adams didn't need to go to such lengths. I didn't answer him. Instead, I took the initiative to lift my arm and wrap it around his neck, pulling him close. Third brother, I don't regret it. I'm willing. When our skin touched, my heartbeat felt tangible. I shyly bit my lip, not daring to open my eyes to look at him. Just at the moment when everything was about to fall into place, I whispered softly, Third brother, I'm a little scared. Can you teach me slowly? Okay. It was another rainy spring night. Just that time, I stood outside Adams's car. I only wanted to say thank you. I had no thoughts of clinging, but this time, I was entangled with him, and there was no way to disentangle myself. The spring rain in the capital gradually intensified, with raindrops tapping on the glass. One by one, my neck, chest, were kissed with patches of red. My waist and thighs were marked with fingerprints. Even my slender calves had faint bite marks. The spring rain in the capital soaked every corner of the world. Even my eyes seemed to hold the wetness of spring affection. Adams, holding my 10 fingers tightly, had his eyes filled with deep desire and satisfaction. In the final moment, he lowered his head and kissed me deeply. I heard him call my name heavily. Molly. At that moment, I felt an illusion. It seemed like I was being loved. Spring in the capital is always short. After the continuous spring rain stopped, it felt like summer arrived overnight. Tonight there was a small party, and it was rare. I was among the invited. Adams respected my wishes. In the circle of the capital, apart from his few close friends, no one knew about our relationship. But now that my family's debt was cleared and the Christ family's old house was reclaimed, the wine in the circle had subtly changed. Rumors were everywhere, saying that I had hooked up with an unknown big shot and was no longer the same as before. People asked me indirectly, but I didn't deny it, just that I wouldn't reveal a single word about the identity of the big shot behind me. This only fueled everyone's curiosity. Even Shelley called me frantically several times. Shelley would attend tonight's party. My scheming cousin Evan would also attend. When the Christ family was still intact, Evan pretended to be sweet and innocent in front of me. But this seemingly harmless sister had already had an affair with Shelley, and when I was at my most difficult and painful, she didn't hesitate to add insult to injury. I don't like causing trouble, but I'm not afraid of it. Shelley and Evan, I won't let either of them go. In the end, I chose a floor-length dress with thin straps. It revealed my beautiful long neck and delicate collarbone, but it also revealed the faint kiss marks on my neck and chest. I didn't let the makeup artist cover them. I even tied up my long hair. and didn't wear any jewelry. Sure enough, when I appeared in the banquet hall, almost everyone's eyes fell on me immediately. Sis, didn't you bring your boyfriend? Evan deliberately looked behind me and giggled. Is there something to hide? Could it be, are you embarrassed? Adams didn't come with me. Such a party couldn't possibly move him. Even if his secretary showed up, it would be a huge face. Before I left, he called and said he would pick me up after the party. Going home, unknowingly, I seemed to have taken Adams's astonishingly large mansion as my own home. I pulled back my thoughts and looked at Evan, my voice cold. Before you talk about being embarrassed, why don't you think about whether you have any face yourself? Evan immediately changed her expression. What do you mean? Just the literal meaning. Don't you know what you've done? Molly, what are you so arrogant about? You've just hooked up with a rich old man. If Uncle and Auntie knew about your disgraceful actions, they wouldn't rest in peace even in the afterlife. I raised my hand and slapped her face hard. Evan was stunned by the slap, instinctively trying to fight back. But I was quicker. I slapped her again. I used all my strength, my nails scratching her face, causing it to bleed slightly. Evan covered her face, crying out, Shelley, look at this wretch Molly. But Shelley stood there, his gaze fixed on me. Shelley, Evan cried again, tugging at Shelley's sleeve. Shelley, however, pushed her aside. Evan nearly fell, but was barely held up by someone's kind assistance. Molly. Shelley's face was very grim, his tone icy. I rubbed my wrist and looked at my sore fingertips. The slap had been so forceful that it had split my well-maintained nails, and there was a faint blood seepage. It really hurt. Shelley walked up and grabbed my wrist. Come with me. I struggled a few times but couldn't break free, so I stopped wasting my strength. Get in the car. Shelley opened the car door and pushed me inside. Shelley, what exactly do you want? Molly, after all these years, I don't want to see you degrade yourself. So, if you want to be someone's lover, why not be with me? Shelley pushed me into the back seat of the car. At least we've known each other since childhood. I know you well enough not to harm you. Shelley, you should think this through. The man I'm with isn't someone you can easily mess with. Molly, I remember I told you on the phone before. No one dares to compete with me for women. I shook my sore wrist, deliberately smiling sarcastically. Shelley, let me remind you, he really is someone you can't afford to provoke. Even if I can't, I will. Shelley's gaze returned to the kiss marks on my chest. It seemed that the sight of those marks completely drove him to lose his rationality. Don't say you're not with Adams. Even if you are, I'll fight him to the end. Do you really dare? My tone of mockery clearly angered Shelley. Molly, no matter how powerful Adams is, he can't control everything in the capital. Besides, you were originally my fiancé, my woman. But Shelley, it's you who didn't want me. Now, I belong to another man. He treats me very well and spoils me. I smiled slowly, my fingers brushing the marks on my chest. You see, we were together last night. Molly, that's enough. Shelley was evidently furious. Shelley, given our past relationship, let me remind you, you can't provoke him. Shelley, you'll bring trouble upon yourself. But evidently, my kind advice seemed to only add fuel to the fire for Shelley. The car sped all the way and finally stopped at Shelley's villa in the suburbs. The night was deep. Shelley had taken my phone right after I got into the car and turned it off, but I wasn't anxious inside. Shelley had taken me away from the banquet hall. Everyone saw it. Adams must have known about it by now. My only worrying was, for a man like Adams, would he be willing to make a big fuss over a woman? After arriving at the villa, Shelley seemed to regain some composure. He sat on the sofa, staring at me with a heavy gaze, but he didn't take further action. I sensed keenly that Shelley was probably regretting it, but due to his pride, he was a bit stuck in a difficult position. I laughed softly, standing up. Can you borrow me your driver to take me somewhere I can get a cab? Let's pretend tonight never happened. Shelley, don't be afraid. Afraid? Don't you feel afraid? You brought me back here but don't dare to touch me. Shelley, after knowing you for so many years, I still understand you a bit. You're just being cowardly. Well, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. After all, there's always someone better out there. Before I could finish, Shelley suddenly stood up and directly grabbed my arm, throwing me onto the sofa. The delicate and fragile fabric was easily torn apart. Under the bright lights, there was a shimmering white expanse, and the pale scar on it was even more glaring and piercing. Shelley's eyes tightened as she bent down and bit into the mark fiercely. As I cried out in pain, the sound of engines roaring outside the door grew louder. With red eyes, Shelley looked up and saw Adams, dressed in a black suit, striding towards us with a cold expression. His face changed abruptly, and he instinctively released his grip. I seized the opportunity to push him away forcefully, clutching my torn dress and crying silently in grievance. Before Shelley could get up, Adams kicked her over to the side. Third brother. He looked disheveled and was sweating in pain, barely managing to stand. But before he could steady himself, he was kicked to the ground again. This time, Shelley's face hit the coffee table hard, blood streaming down as she lost consciousness. Terrified, I stopped crying, shrinking into the corner of the sofa, watching Adams in fear. I was trembling all over. Adams glanced at me and then instructed his secretary, "Clean up this mess." Yes, Adams, the secretary, evidently frightened, spoke with a trembling voice. Adams lowered his gaze, adjusted his cuff, and walked over to me. "Third brother, are you hurt?" I shook my head quickly. No, but the torn dress exposed the bite mark on my chest. On the snow-white fabric, red bloodstains were spreading. Adams's pupils tightened suddenly, and his face turned icy cold. I raised my hand to block him, but he bent down and picked me up. "Third brother, I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face again. Adams didn't respond, but his arms around me were tightly gripping. I could barely breathe, but I didn't dare to struggle, only biting my teeth and enduring it, until we got into the car and drove back to the villa on the hill. Throughout the journey, Adams didn't say a word, but he didn't let me down from his arms either. The atmosphere was oppressive to the extreme, and my heart was in a state of chaotic turmoil. I knew very well that my little schemes and thoughts were insignificant compared to Adam's, but beyond that, I had no other way to take revenge on Shelley. I couldn't swallow this grievance from start to finish. I could understand Shelley's drastic change in attitude after the Christ family's incident, but the one thing I couldn't get over was my mother's suicide by jumping off a building at the hospital. She died tragically in front of me. Shelley wasn't the direct killer, but his connection to my mother's death couldn't be ignored. On my own, I would never have a chance to get revenge on Shelley, but how could I just watch him continue living a life of luxury and ease without paying any price? So I despicably chose to use Adams, using his shallow affection and obsession with me. After tending to my wounds, I took a quick shower. When I came out, Adams was smoking on the terrace. I hesitated for a long time before approaching him from behind. My voice as soft as a whisper. "Third brother." He slowly turned around, leaning against the railing and looking at me. The slender cigarette between his fingers flickered with a faint light, carrying a clear sandalwood scent. Standing in front of him, I felt utterly exposed. I didn't dare to meet his gaze. The brief half-minute felt like an eternity. Adams extinguished the cigarette in his hand and took a step forward. I instinctively wanted to retreat, but he pressed me against the glass door. "Molly." His fingers, tinged with the faint scent of tobacco, caressed my lips. My heart pounded like a drum, my legs feeling too weak to stand. Adams bent down, his warm breath brushing past my ear. "If you want to do anything in the future, just tell me directly. I will always agree to it. You don't have to do this. You don't need to demean yourself. Molly, do you understand?" I was so ashamed I felt I had nowhere to hide. Tears immediately welled up. "I'm sorry. Third brother, I'm sorry. I don't like it when you say sorry to me. Molly, I also don't like it when you say thank you." Adams cupped my chin, forcing me to look at him. In my tear-filled eyes, his handsome face blurred, but the heat of his kiss seemed to burn deeply into my heart. For a long time afterward, I didn't see Shelley again. Even his name seemed to have become a taboo, rarely mentioned. I did see Evan once, after the Christ family's incident. Our uncle's family, which had previously relied on us, quickly fell into a dire situation. Previously, Evan's association with Shelley had allowed them to cling on for a while. But now, with Shelley's situation worsening, Evan was in an even more difficult position. I heard she had become a mistress to an older married man, still dressed in gold and silver, but looking quite haggard. Her eyes seemed to carry a hint of injury. But at that time, we didn't speak, didn't exchange pleasantries. We were like complete strangers. I didn't care about their future circumstances, because at the most difficult times, at the moment they kicked me when I was down, in my heart, these people were all dead. Everything seemed to have settled. Like any university student, I completed my graduation thesis, defended it, and received my diploma. An alumna from the school, now running a training school in Hong Kong, invited me to join her there. We used to be in the same dance troupe at school. She offered me a decent salary. I was tempted. After all, Adams and I would eventually part ways. To survive and live well in this world, one must learn to make a living, without family and relatives to rely on. My only asset was this skill. The Adams had always treated me very well. Parting ways was hard to bring up. As the year-end approached, I met Adams's mother for the first time. We had tea in a very private tea house. She spoke very kindly, like a loving elder by my side, but my heart was always tense, unable to relax. Halfway through the tea, she set down her cup and sighed. After the new year, Adams will be 29. His marriage has always been a concern for his father and me. Recently, I asked him, and he still said he has no plans to marry. She then looked at me. Molly, you and Adams have been together for almost a year now, haven't you? I nodded. Yes, it will be a year by next spring. She smiled. Adams has been busy with work these years and hasn't dated anyone. You're the first girl he likes. His father and I originally thought we'd be able to hold a grandchild soon. I looked down at the tea leaves floating in the cup. My fingers, resting on my lap, were tightly knotted together and trembling slightly. Although I had always been very clear-headed and rational, knowing that Adams and I wouldn't have a future, knowing that we would eventually part ways, but hearing him say he had no plans to marry, it still hurt absurdly. You're a good girl. I know about your family situation and I'm very sorry for you. But Molly, she looked at me with some sympathy. I'm just afraid Adams might delay you. After all, a girl's youth is very short and precious. I struggled to maintain my composure, looking up at her. Auntie, what do you want me to do? Auntie doesn't want you to do anything in particular. I just don't want to delay such a good girl like you. If Adams has no plans to marry, you don't need to waste your time on him, do you? You're right. You're very smart, Molly, even at such a young age. You're clear-headed and rational. I believe you will do well no matter what. When I left the tea house, I didn't take a car and walked alone for a long time. The winter wind was cold, but it made me painfully clear-headed. Auntie was a good person. Her intentions were expressed very tactfully, but she didn't make me feel uncomfortable. I knew that with my current status, I wasn't worthy of Adams. That Auntie didn't harm my pitiful self-esteem. For that alone, I was grateful to her. At the crossroads, when the green light came on, I walked across the crosswalk with the crowd. A nearby store was playing a song by Ervischow. As I crossed the street, "Where are you? How should I continue down this road?" I suddenly stopped, standing in the chill of Beijing's winter wind, tears silently streaming down my face. On New Year's Eve, Adams became even busier. Recently, he had gone on a business trip to France, and he sent me a few photos on WeChat. Molly, what do you think of this girl? She has known Adams since she was young. I think she looks a bit like you. Do you think Adams will like her? I looked at the beautiful and gentle girl in the photos. My heart ached with a shiver. People are greedy, and knowingly, I seemed to want more and more from Adams. I couldn't bear to think of Adams marrying someone else. I couldn't bear to think of him kissing and embracing other women, being intimate with them. I couldn't bear to think of him sharing a bed with another woman and nurturing new life. Even just thinking about it was painfully unbearable, making me wish I could die immediately. But in the end, I still managed to calmly reply to Auntie's message. Auntie, the person you choose must be the most suitable. Third brother will like her. That's good. Molly, you mentioned wanting to work in Hong Kong. How are you considering that? Auntie has a vacant house in Hong Kong. If you go, you can move in directly. Safety is most important for a young girl like you. No, Auntie, my senior sister has an apartment there. I'll be sharing it with her. All right. Auntie is reassured. The next day, Auntie posted on Moments. In a revolving restaurant in Paris, a beautiful girl in a Chanel gown smiled sweetly at a distinguished and handsome young man. The young man also looked at her with a warm smile. The girl in the photo was indeed the socialite Auntie had sent me a photo of the previous day. Her beauty was just the most trivial of her attributes. That relaxed and peaceful demeanor, cultivated from years of wealth, was naturally written in her every gesture. She and Adams really seemed like a perfect match. I closed WeChat. At 11 o'clock Paris time, Adams called me as usual. I really wanted to ask him if the girl he had lunch with in the restaurant during the day resembled me, and if he liked her. But I ultimately didn't ask. At 1 o'clock in the early morning Paris time, Adams should have been asleep. I sent him a message. Third brother, will you marry me? At 6 o'clock Paris time the next morning. When Adams woke up, he saw Molly's text from the previous night. He prepared to call her immediately but remembered that Molly usually took a nap at this time. He thought for a moment and replied, "Behave, wait for me to come back." Putting down his phone, Adams immediately summoned his secretary and assistant. The originally week-long itinerary was compressed to 2 days. He even found time to personally buy an extremely rare loose diamond. Paris is a fashion capital, but due to the tight schedule, custom orders were impossible. Adams directly spent a fortune on a set of jewelry that Queen Elizabeth wore at her coronation in the last century. Proposals shouldn't be initiated by girls, so he didn't directly reply that he wanted to marry her. From the beginning, he was serious, but he had never sensed her heart. She had always been distant from this relationship. She never tried to open up her feelings to him, so he never spoke up, fearing he would scare her away, pushing her further away. It was only after receiving this message that he regretted it deeply. So even though time was tight, he wanted to give her the grandest proposal he could. But after everything was arranged, Adams received a message from Molly. Third brother, I'm sorry. I was daydreaming and had thoughts I shouldn't have, making things difficult for you. I have decided to work in Hong Kong and will not return to Beijing. In the past year, I will always remember third brother's kindness and care. I wish third brother all the best and a fulfilling life. Adams looked at the screen of his phone. He stared at the few lines of text for a full 10 minutes. When he called again, the number had already been disconnected and was unreachable. He tried calling the villa. The servant answered nervously. Molly left early in the morning. Adams hung up the phone. He took out a brocade box from his coat pocket. Inside was a fiery red diamond, dazzling and brilliant. He had imagined countless times how beautiful it would be to make it into an engagement ring for her. But at this moment, just 1 second before his wish was about to be fulfilled, it all came crashing down. This is what it feels like. Adams put the diamond away and called his secretary. Find out what happened in Beijing today and tell me everything. Not missing a word. The climate in Hong Kong is different from Beijing. The winter is just a bit damp and chilly, not cold. After 2 weeks on the job, I had gradually adapted to the fast-paced life here, thinking about how those wealthy men once made me go on stage and caused a scene. Now, for my livelihood, I began to accept various performance offers. For the sake of making a living, the world is unpredictable, but living in this world, the first priority is to fill your stomach. Working hard to make a living is not shameful. When I left Beijing, I took nothing with me. Adams had never treated me poorly, but from the start, I was using him. I didn't have the face to take anything he gave me. So when I left, I only took my own belongings. But Adams had clearly spoiled me. The luxurious and comfortable lifestyle over the past year made me quite uncomfortable when I first moved into a small apartment in Hong Kong, where spaces measured by the square foot. With the new year approaching, my senior received a very lucrative private job offer. I heard that Victoria Harbour would be hosting an all-night fireworks display. We would be performing on a cruise ship, and the pay was astounding. The entire dance troupe decided to forego their New Year's vacation. After boarding the cruise ship and in the intervals between the intense preparations before the performance, I overheard a few young women excitedly discussing. I heard a very mysterious and low-profile big shot from Beijing just bought a whole mountain here in Hong Kong. I heard that too. Apparently, tonight's fireworks display over Victoria Harbour is also his doing. An all-night fireworks display every minute must be burning through money. I wonder if we'll get to see this big shot tonight. Are you kidding? Such a big shot would definitely be surrounded by bodyguards and assistants. There's probably a no-entry zone within 100 meters. Listening to these discussions, I just smiled and paid them no mind. The extravagance of the wealthy is beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Do you know what the big shot plans to do with the mountain? What? Build a mansion? A private estate? A villa on the mountain top? Is the big shot insane? One of the young women looked puzzled. I heard he plans to plant gardenias everywhere. I felt the sudden stir in my heart. I was momentarily stunned. That crazy thought nearly surged up immediately, but I desperately suppressed it. Maybe it was because I had witnessed the coldness and warmth of human relationships overnight, so I instinctively didn't believe I could ever be so favored. But gardenias. During the months I lived in Adam's luxurious mansion on Adams Street, the garden had unknowingly been filled with gardenias. He never spoke much, but just as he had promised me at the beginning, "Molly, whatever you want to do, I will always agree to it. Molly, come out, someone's looking for you." My senior suddenly rushed over and pulled me out, still in my thin dance costume. When I was pulled into the hall by my senior, I saw Adams holding a glass of wine, chatting and laughing with others. Adams spent a fortune buying a mountain, and I heard he plans to plant it with gardenias. May I ask if there's any special reason for this? Adams' gaze moved across the crowd and fixed on a particular spot. My palms were damp with sweat, and my heart felt almost like it had stopped beating, almost frozen. There's no special reason. I just want to win back the affection of someone I care about. A wave of astonishment swept through the room. Which lady is so fortunate that Adams went through such trouble to make her happy? Adams, if I may ask, is this lady here tonight? It's my fault for not doing something properly and making her angry. It's my fault for not giving her enough sense of security, for not telling her my true feelings when she needed reassurance. She is here, but I don't know if she is still angry with me or if she's willing to see me. Everyone was whispering and looking around. Adams, however, only looked at me, causing everyone's attention to focus on me. My senior gently nudged me. "Molly, go over there." But I stood there, my feet feeling as if they were nailed to the floor, tears streaming down my face without end. Molly, my senior, with red eyes, gently held my hand. Love isn't just about words. Love is often feeling that you are something. Molly, Adams truly loves you. I finally took a step forward, but just as I took my first step, Adams had already set down his wine glass and was walking swiftly toward me. The night sky over Victoria Harbour was ablaze with fireworks. Adams held me tightly in his arms and whispered in my ear, "Molly, you only need to take the first step toward me. I will walk the rest of the way for you." I cried in his arms for a long time, but after crying, I still couldn't help but ask him, "What about that beautiful girl who was with you in France?" "She has someone she likes." During that meeting, we agreed to go back and clarify things with our families and not cause any misunderstandings. "You didn't lie to me." "Molly, I have never told you a lie." I couldn't help but smile, but as I smiled, tears fell again. "Third brother, I always feel like I don't deserve you. I'm bad and selfish, using you time and time again, although I willingly let you use me. But Molly, I hope you can always tell me directly if you have any concerns. Come to me directly, because no matter what, I will always agree to you. From the beginning, I told you, Molly, as long as you speak to me, whatever you want, I will agree to it." Adams lowered his head, wiping away the tears from the corner of my eyes. "This promise is forever true and will never change." And so, it was throughout our long life together. Adams never broke his word to me. As my senior said, He never spoke of love lightly, but his love permeated every detail of life. Yet for Adams, it seemed he always felt he hadn't done enough, because he couldn't share the pain of childbirth or the challenges of breastfeeding with me. He felt deeply indebted to me. In a wealthy family, and more children are considered a blessing, we only had one child. He refused to let me go through childbirth again, which was stubbornly touching. What I could give him in return was wholehearted love, a lifetime of affectionate companionship. This story is concluded. Feel free to subscribe to the channel to get the latest content, with many novels updated daily.